All right, let's dive deep into Amazon SNS today,
Yeah.
but not the, beginner stuff. We're going way deeper than that. More like those little aha moments that'll make you like the SNS pro on your team.
The basics of notifications, but
Yeah,
what's interesting for us as senior devs is how SNS goes so much further. It's all about building those systems that just react like instantly to events without all that overhead of polling all the time.
so it's more about like event-driven architecture
Yeah.
than just, messages.
Yeah, exactly. Like think of it as the nervous system of your application. You get an order placed, bam, SNS instantly triggers all these notifications. Update inventory, send an email, and even maybe ping a fulfillment center. It all just happens at the same time, makes your system super responsive.
That makes a lot of sense. But we also need to be smart about choosing the right tool. We work on complex systems, and sometimes a queue-based service like SQS or a message broker like MQ might actually be a better fit than SNS.
Absolutely. It's like having a toolbox full of different messaging options.
Right.
Knowing when to use which one is what makes you an architect, not just a coder SQS, for example. It's perfect when you need guaranteed message delivery, but you don't need that instant push. Maybe you're processing some huge files or tasks that can be done a bit later.
So SQS is more about reliable queuing, and SNS
Yeah.
is about those real-time reactions. Then we've got MQ for those times when you need like a serious message broker.
Exactly. Things like complex routing, message persistence, guaranteed delivery. Even when the network's acting up, MQ really shines when you're working with older systems or need a ton of control and reliability.
All right, so we've got our messaging options figured out. Let's get back to SNS and talk about those FIFO topics. What's so important about this feature, especially for senior devs working on systems where message order is like mission critical?
Imagine you're building a financial app where every transaction has to be processed in the exact order it happened, or you're dealing with sensor data that needs to be analyzed sequentially. SNS FIFO topics guarantee that messages are delivered in order, just like they were published. No risk of data getting messed up or inconsistent.
So if I'm designing a system where a single message out of order could cause huge problems, FIFO topics are my go-to.
Exactly. It's all about building those super dependable systems. And understanding those little details in SNS is key, especially at a senior level.
And what's really cool is how SNS FIFO topics can work with SQS FIFO queues. We're talking end-to-end reliability, from when a message is published to when it's processed.
Yeah, that integration is a game changer for building highly reliable and fault-tolerant systems. It's the best of both worlds, the immediate push of SNS and the guaranteed order and durability of those SQS FIFO queues.
Now let's switch gears and talk about something that's always on our minds, security. We all know how to set basic permissions, but with SNS, security goes way beyond that.
Absolutely. You need to really understand how SNS authentication works, message signing, and how these things tie into bigger security principles like least privilege and defense in depth.
So it's not just knowing how to click a setting, it's about understanding why it matters and how it affects the overall security of our app.
Exactly. Let's start with authentication. SNS uses AWS's signature version 4 process for every single request. So everything is cryptographically signed, which means it came from a trusted source and nobody messed with it along the way.
That's a seriously strong system. So how does that work in the real world? If I've got multiple microservices sending messages to an SNS topic, how do I make sure only the right ones can publish?
That's where those access control policies come in. They let you define who can publish to a topic and who can subscribe to it. You can restrict access based on AWS accounts, IMM users, and even specific roles.
So I could create a policy that only lets services with a specific IAM role publish messages about, say, financial transactions.
Yeah,
So even if someone bad got into one of my services, they couldn't mess with my sensitive topics.
exactly. And you can even go further by signing your messages using AWS KMS. It's like adding another layer of security because it lets subscribers verify that the message is legit and hasn't been tampered with.
So it's like adding a tamper-proof seal to your messages. That's a
Yes.
great way to think about it. Message signing makes sure that publishers are who they say they are, and that the messages haven't been messed with in transit.
Mm-hmm.
We've got all these layers of defense authentication, authorization, and message signing all working together to build a really strong security foundation for our SNS architecture.
Exactly. And understanding these things is so important for senior devs. You're not just coding. You're designing systems that are secure and reliable. And that means thinking about security at every level.
Let's talk about some of those less known but super powerful features of SNS that can make a big difference. I'm talking about raw message delivery and mobile push notifications. those hidden gems.
Yeah, raw message delivery can be a real game changer for performance. By default, SNS wraps messages in a JSON envelope with metadata, but sometimes you just need pure speed, and that extra processing can slow things down.
So with raw message delivery, you can skip that JSON envelope when every millisecond counts. But wouldn't we lose important metadata?
That's the trade-off. You gain speed but lose some metadata. It's all about choosing the right approach for what you're building. As a senior dev, you have to know when you need that raw speed and when you need the metadata from the JSON format.
So if I'm dealing with high-volume, time-sensitive data where even a few milliseconds matter, raw message delivery might be worth checking out.
Right, but if you need that metadata for things like tracking or filtering, then stick with the standard JSON format.
And there's mobile push notifications. It's so much more than just sending a message to a phone. It can get pretty complex.
Yeah.
Managing device tokens, handling feedback from different platforms like APNs for iOS and FCM for Android.
Mobile push is super powerful for connecting with users in real time, but it definitely has its challenges. You need to know how to store and manage those device tokens, handle all the different platform requirements, and deal with things like token expiration and delivery failures gracefully.
So it's not just about sending a message. It's about building a whole mobile push infrastructure that can handle potentially millions of devices.
Exactly. You have to think about token lifecycle management, error handling, and even having backup plans in case those notifications don't reach the devices.
I'm noticing a pattern here,
Yeah.
whether it's security raw message delivery or mobile push. Being a senior dev using SNS is all about understanding the details, the trade-offs, and the why behind the what. It's about making smart choices that work for your specific application and your users.
Exactly. You're not just implementing a feature, you're architecting a solution. And that takes a deep understanding of not just the service itself, but also the big picture of how it all fits together.
This has been great. We've covered so much, but it feels like we're just getting started. There's still a ton more to learn about SNS, especially from a senior dev perspective. Let's keep this deep dive going in the next part.
Welcome back to our deep dive on Amazon SNS.
It's great to be back. We covered some really interesting stuff going beyond the basics, to see how we can really use SNS to build powerful systems as senior devs and architects.
Yeah, we talked about picking the right messaging tool, the power of FIFO topics for making sure messages are in order, and how to make things secure with those multi-layered defenses.
And we even dug into those hidden gems,
Mhm.
like raw message delivery and mobile push notifications,
Yeah,
finding out all those little details that we need to be aware of as senior devs.
but we're not done yet with SNS. There's still so much more to discover, especially when we look at how SNS works with other AWS services to build these seamless and scalable architectures.
That's what I'm excited about. SNS isn't just a service on its own. It's like the connection point for our whole AWS ecosystem.
Right.
We can use it to build these really powerful and flexible systems.
Exactly. It's like the glue that holds everything together, compute, storage, messaging. It all just works together seamlessly.
So let's talk about some of these key integrations that we as senior devs should know. We talked about how SNS can work with SQS for real-time push and reliable queuing. What are some other powerful combos that we need to be aware of?
One of the most powerful is AWS Lambda. When you put SNS and Lambda together, it's like the foundation of serverless architectures. You can build event-driven systems that scale automatically, and you only pay for what you use.
It's like having a bunch of little workers ready to go whenever something interesting happens in your system.
Right.
An image gets uploaded, a new user signs up,
Yeah.
a payment is processed. All these events can trigger Lambda functions through SNS, so you can build systems that are really reactive.
And it's not just about reacting, it's also about transforming and enriching data as it moves through your system.
Yeah.
Say you're getting sensor data from IoT devices, you can use SNS to send that data to different Lambda functions, each one doing a specific task, like cleaning the data, analyzing it for anything unusual, or storing it in a database.
So instead of having one big app trying to do everything, we break it down into smaller functions, each one handling a specific part of the data processing pipeline.
Exactly. And because each function is triggered separately by events, your system can easily scale horizontally. You can process tons of data without any problems.
That's what's so great about serverless.
Yeah.
You're building systems that are elastic, resilient, and can handle anything.
And SNS is a key part of making that happen. It lets you build these systems where each part can change independently, so your whole architecture is more flexible and adaptable.
Okay, we talked about Lambda. What about other integrations? I know SNS can also work with CloudWatch Event Bridge and even AWS IoT, right?
You got it. Integrating SNS with CloudWatch is essential for monitoring and alerting. You can set up CloudWatch alarms to trigger SNS notifications when something happens. Like if your API suddenly gets slower or you have more errors, then you can fix things before your users are affected.
So we don't have to watch dashboards all the time.
Yeah.
We can have these automatic alerts that tell us when something needs attention, like having a security system for our system's health.
Exactly. And then there's EventBridge. It's really powerful for building event-driven architectures that work across multiple AWS accounts. And even with apps from other companies, you can use SNS to publish events to EventBridge. So you can have systems where different parts talk to each other without being directly connected.
So let's say someone places an order in our e-commerce app. That could trigger an event that goes to EventBridge through SNS,
Right.
and then a completely different system. Maybe a logistics platform could be listening for that event.
Yeah.
Start getting the order ready for shipping.
Exactly. It's how you build systems that are really distributed and independent. And then there's AWS IoT, which lets you connect billions of devices to the cloud. You can use SNS to get notifications from those devices and then do things in your systems based on those notifications.
So if we have sensors in a factory sending data about temperature, pressure, or vibration, we can use SNS to send that data to Lambda functions that can then analyze it, send alerts, or even change how the factory operates in real time.
It's all about building these smart connected systems
Yeah,
that can react to what's happening in the real world.
this is amazing.
Yeah.
We've barely scratched the surface of what's possible when you combine SNS with these other AWS services. It opens up so many possibilities for building complex, scalable, and event-driven architectures.
And that's what makes SNS so interesting, especially for senior devs and architects. It's a service that keeps evolving, adding new features and integrations, and pushing the boundaries of what we can do in the cloud.
But even with all this power and flexibility, we can't forget about one important thing: making sure our systems are running smoothly and that we can quickly fix any problems that come up. We need to talk about monitoring and troubleshooting.
You're absolutely right. At a senior level, it's not just about building things, it's about making sure they work reliably and that you have the tools and knowledge to figure out and fix problems effectively.
So let's get into that.
Yeah.
What are the key strategies and tools that we should be using to monitor and troubleshoot our SNS architectures? So we've been exploring this whole world of Amazon SNS.
Right.
We went beyond those basic tutorials to find those insights that really matter for senior devs and architects.
We covered a lot of ground, from choosing the right messaging service to securing our systems with those multi-layered defenses.
And we saw how SNS just fits in perfectly with other AWS services like Lambda, SQS CloudWatch, and EventBridge. We can use them to build these super flexible and scalable architectures.
But like you said, building these systems is just the first step. We need to make sure they're running smoothly and that we can quickly spot and fix any problems. Monitoring and troubleshooting, that's what's crucial, especially at a senior level where we're responsible for keeping our applications healthy and reliable.
So let's jump into that. What are some of the key strategies and tools we should be using to monitor and troubleshoot those SNS architectures?
The good news is AWS gives us a ton of great tools for this Amazon CloudWatch. It's our go-to for monitoring pretty much everything in AWS, and that includes SNS. It gives us a bunch of metrics that help us understand how our messaging infrastructure is performing.
So things like the number of messages published, how many were delivered successfully, any failures, and even how long it takes for messages to be delivered. There's a lot of data there.
There is, and it's super valuable. With CloudWatch, you can create dashboards to actually see these metrics, set up alarms that notify you if something goes wrong, and even use CloudWatch logs to get more details about specific messages.
That would be really helpful for troubleshooting.
Right.
If we suddenly see a spike in failed deliveries, we know there's a problem, and we can use CloudWatch logs to figure out exactly which messages are failing and why.
Exactly. And you can set up alarms for all kinds of situations, like a sudden drop in message throughput, a slowdown in delivery, or even a big jump in the number of messages going to a dead letter queue.
Speaking of dead letter queues, they're so important for building resilient systems.
Right?
They act like a safety net, catching any messages that couldn't be delivered for some reason, so we can investigate and fix things.
Absolutely. If you don't have a dead letter queue, those messages just disappear. And it's really tough to figure out what went wrong. And by setting up a dead letter queue for our SNS topics, we make sure those undeliverable messages are saved, and we can deal with them later.
So CloudWatch gives us a great overall view of our SNS infrastructure. And CloudWatch logs let us see the details of individual messages. But what if we want to see how messages are flowing through our whole system, across multiple services and components?
That's where AWS X-Ray comes in. It's a distributed tracing service that shows you how requests are being processed throughout your entire app, including SNS.
So if a message is published to SNS and then triggers a Lambda function, which then talks to a DynamoDB table, we can see that whole journey in X-ray, including how long each step took.
Exactly. It's like having X-ray vision into your application. You can see where messages are going and find any bottlenecks or performance issues.
That's awesome for optimizing our architecture. We can see where we're spending the most time processing messages and then focus on making those parts faster.
And X-ray works really well with SNS, so you can get detailed traces of your messaging flows without writing a lot of extra code.
Now, we've talked about monitoring and troubleshooting from the system side, but let's not forget about us developers. As senior devs, we need tools that help us write better code and catch errors early on.
You're right. And for that, we have the Amazon SNS Message Validator. It's a pretty new tool, but it's super helpful for checking the structure and content of our messages before we even send them.
So we can catch those formatting errors or missing attributes right away during development, instead of having to deal with them later when it's much harder to fix.
Exactly. The Message Validator makes sure our messages follow the SNS format, so they're well-formed and have all the required information. It's like a spell checker for our SNS messages.
That's a perfect example of how AWS keeps making things better, adding new tools to make our lives easier and our systems more reliable.
It shows how much they care about developer experience and helping us build the best applications possible.
So we've come a long way. We started with the core features of SNS, then we saw how it works with other AWS services, and now we've even talked about monitoring, troubleshooting, and validating our messages. We really dug deep into this topic.
We did. We looked at SNS from every angle, covering not just the what, but also the why and the how. You've got the knowledge and insights you need to be a true SNS expert.
That's what the deep dive is all about, giving you those aha moments that help you level up and become the go-to person on your team.
It's been great diving into SNS with you. I hope you learned a lot and enjoyed the journey.
Me too. And to everyone listening out there, keep learning, keep building, and remember, this journey never really ends. There's always something new to discover, a new challenge to tackle, and a new depth to explore.
Until next time, happy building.